Welcome to Paranormal Pages. Let's get straight into the true scary stories. Story 1. The Frosted Grip. The night had always been my sanctuary. A time where silence draped itself over the world like a comforting blanket. But recently, my nights had turned into a theater of horror. It began subtly, a creak here, a whisper there. At first, I dismissed these as figments of an overactive imagination. My old house, a colonial relic passed down through generations, seemed the perfect breeding ground for such flights of fancy. I was wrong. It was a particularly frigid night when the incident occurred. The kind of cold that seeps into your bones and makes even the warmth of a thick blanket seem futile. I lay in my bed, cocooned in layers, drifting between the edges of consciousness and dreams. That's when I felt it, a cold hand grasping mine. It was an icy, bone-chilling grip that sent shivers racing down my spine. I tried to pull away, but the grip tightened, its cold seeping through my skin, freezing my very blood. My eyes flew open, but the darkness of the room was unbroken. I yanked my hand back, my breath coming in shallow, panicked gasps. I fumbled for the light switch on my nightstand, and when the soft glow filled the room, there was no one there. I stared at my hand in the dim light. Frostbite. The tips of my fingers were white, the skin taut and numb. "Who's there?" My voice trembled, echoing through the emptiness. There was no answer, only the oppressive silence. I forced myself out of bed, my legs shaky, and inspected the room. Nothing seemed out of place, but a pervasive chill hung in the air, more penetrating than the winter outside. I spent the rest of the night in the living room, wrapped in a thick blanket, the fireplace crackling feebly. Sleep was impossible. Every creak of the house, every whisper of wind outside made me jump. Dawn couldn't come fast enough, and when it did, I called Dr. Harris, the town's physician, to examine my hand. Dr. Harris looked at me with a mixture of concern and skepticism as he unwrapped the layers of bandages. "You say this happened in your sleep?" His tone suggested he was waiting for the punchline of a joke. "Yes," I replied, wincing as he probed the frostbitten skin. I felt a hand grasp mine. It was so cold. "Are you sure you didn't sleepwalk and touch something frozen?" His voice was gentle, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. "I know what I felt, doctor," I insisted, my voice firmer than I felt. "There was something, in my room." He nodded slowly, more to placate me than out of agreement. "I'll prescribe something for the pain. Keep it wrapped and avoid exposing it to cold temperatures." I thanked him and left, my mind a whirl of confusion and fear. What had happened to me was beyond natural explanation, and I had no idea where to turn. As the days passed, the frostbite slowly healed, but the memory of that icy grip haunted my every step. Each night, I dreaded the moment I'd have to close my eyes, fearing what might happen if I did. It was then that I began to notice other things. Little things, at first. Objects slightly out of place, faint footprints in the dust. And then, the whispers. They were soft at first, barely audible over the rustle of leaves or the hum of the refrigerator. But soon, they became unmistakable, a hissing chorus that echoed in the stillness of the house. I had to find out what was happening. I couldn't live in this constant state of fear. So, armed with a resolve born from desperation, I began to delve into the history of my home, seeking answers to the mystery that enveloped me like a shroud. Hey! Subscribe for more scary stories. Days turned into weeks as I scoured every nook and cranny of the old house, looking for any clues that could explain the terrifying occurrences. I pored over family records, old photographs, and forgotten letters. The whispers persisted, growing louder, more insistent, as if urging me to uncover a long-buried secret. One evening, while rummaging through the attic, I found a weathered trunk hidden beneath a pile of dusty blankets. It was locked, but determination and a bit of forced pried it open. Inside were items that seemed out of place in our family history: old, ornate clothing, a faded journal, and a small silver locket. The journal, its pages yellowed with age, belonged to a woman named Eliza Montgomery, a name unfamiliar to me. As I read her entries, a story of love, betrayal, and sorrow unfolded. Eliza had lived in the house over a century ago. She wrote of a passionate affair with a man named Thomas, who promised her the world. But Thomas betrayed her, marrying another woman for wealth and status. Eliza's heartbreak turned to fury, and she detailed a chilling vow of vengeance in her final entry: "If I cannot have his heart, no one shall find peace in this house. My spirit will linger, a cold hand in the dark, until justice is done." The words sent a shiver down my spine, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. Eliza's spirit was still here, trapped in a cycle of rage and sorrow. I took the journal to the town library, hoping to find more about Eliza and Thomas. The librarian, Mrs. Crane, was a font of knowledge about the town's history. When I mentioned Eliza's name, she paled slightly, but quickly composed herself. "Eliza Montgomery's story is a tragic one," she said, her voice hushed. "She was found dead in her room, frozen to death on a warm summer night. They say her spirit never left. How do I help her find peace?" I asked, desperate for any solution. Mrs. Crane hesitated. "Some believe that confronting the spirit and acknowledging her pain can release her. But be careful. Spirits tied to vengeance are unpredictable." That night, I returned home with a plan. I would try to communicate with Eliza, to show her that her story was known and her pain acknowledged. I set up candles around my room, their flickering light casting eerie shadows on the walls. Holding the journal tightly, I called out to her. "Eliza, I know your story. I know your pain. Please, show yourself." For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of my own heartbeat. Then, the temperature in the room plummeted, my breath forming clouds in the air. The candles flickered wildly, and the whispers grew to a crescendo. "He betrayed me," a voice hissed, the words echoing through the room. "Eliza, you don't have to suffer anymore," I pleaded. "Thomas is long gone. You deserve peace." A cold breeze swept through the room, and for an instant, I saw her, a translucent figure of a young woman, her eyes filled with sorrow. "Peace," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Yes, peace," I repeated, stepping closer. "You can rest now. Your story has been told." Her figure shimmered, the icy grip on my heart loosening. She seemed to smile, and then she was gone. The room warmed instantly, the oppressive chill lifting as if a great weight had been removed. I thought it was over. I truly believed I had helped her move on. But that night, as I slept, I felt it again, the cold hand grasping mine. I woke with a start, my hand once again covered in frostbite, the whispers louder than ever before. The terror that gripped me upon awakening to another frostbitten hand was unlike anything I had ever experienced. Eliza's spirit had not moved on. Instead, her presence seemed stronger, more malevolent. I had underestimated the depth of her sorrow and rage. It was clear that uncovering her story wasn't enough. Something else was binding her to this house, something darker and more sinister. I couldn't face this alone. My thoughts turned to my old friend and paranormal investigator, Michael. We had drifted apart over the years, but his expertise in dealing with the supernatural was my last hope. I reached out to him, explaining my situation. To my relief, he agreed to help and promised to visit the following weekend. When Michael arrived, his demeanor was serious, a stark contrast to his usual easygoing nature. "This sounds like a classic case of a vengeful spirit," he said after I had recounted everything. "But it's unusual for a spirit to cause physical harm like frostbite. We need to understand what's truly anchoring her here." We spent the next few days setting up equipment around the house, thermal cameras, EVP recorders, and motion detectors. Michael conducted a thorough investigation, and on the third night, we gathered in the living room to review the findings. The recordings were chilling. Disembodied voices filled the tapes, some of them pleading, others filled with rage. One phrase, however, stood out: "Find the locket." "The locket?" I asked, puzzled. "You mean the one I found in the trunk?" Michael nodded. "It must be significant. Spirits often attach themselves to personal items. It's possible that the locket holds the key to understanding her torment." We retrieved the locket and carefully examined it. It was a delicate piece, intricately engraved with the initials EM. Inside was a tiny, faded portrait of a young man, Thomas, I assumed. But there was something else, a small, folded piece of paper hidden behind the portrait. With trembling hands, I unfolded it. The note was brief but filled with despair. To Eliza, my eternal love. Forgive me. This changes everything, Michael said quietly. Thomas did love her. But something, or someone, forced him to marry another. I felt a surge of empathy for Eliza. She had died believing she was betrayed, her spirit bound by that belief. But who had manipulated their lives so cruelly? The answer came to me suddenly: Thomas's family. They had been powerful and ruthless, known for their cold, calculating nature. Michael, we need to confront her again, I said, determination hardening my voice. She needs to know the truth. We returned to my room, the locket and note in hand. I called out to Eliza once more. Eliza, I have something to show you. It's from Thomas. The temperature dropped sharply, the now familiar chill enveloping the room. Her ghostly figure appeared, eyes wide with a mix of hope and anger. Thomas. He loved you, Eliza, I said, holding out the locket. He was forced to marry another. Look at the note he left you. Her ghostly hand reached out, touching the locket. The room seemed to vibrate with energy, her presence becoming almost tangible. She read the note, her expression shifting from anger to sorrow, then to a profound sadness. I never knew. I'm sorry for your pain, I said gently. But you can be free now. You can move on. Her form shimmered, and for a moment, I thought we had succeeded. But then, the room grew colder than ever before, and a new voice, dark and menacing, filled the air. You think you can free her so easily? Michael and I froze, the new presence exuding pure malice. It wasn't just Eliza. Something much darker was here, something that had kept her bound in torment for over a century. The sinister voice reverberated through the room, filling every corner with a palpable sense of dread. Michael and I stood frozen, the weight of an unseen presence bearing down on us. The air was so cold it hurt to breathe, and the shadows seemed to twist and writhe with malevolent intent. Who are you? I demanded, my voice quivering. What do you want? The voice laughed, a low, mocking sound that sent shivers down my spine. I am the guardian of her pain. The keeper of her despair. You cannot banish what you do not understand. Michael stepped forward, his face set in grim determination. We're not afraid of you, he said, his voice steady. Eliza deserves peace, and we will give it to her. The room seemed to darken, the shadows closing in. The temperature dropped even further, frost forming on the walls. Fools, the voice hissed. Her suffering is eternal. As long as I exist, she will never find peace. I felt a surge of defiance. You're the one who forced Thomas to betray her, aren't you? I accused. You manipulated their lives for your own gain. The voice laughed again, a chilling sound. Yes, and I have enjoyed every moment of their torment. Eliza's pain feeds me, keeps me strong. I gripped the locket tightly, drawing strength from its presence. Not anymore, I said, my voice firm. We will end this. We will free her. Michael and I joined hands, standing strong against the encroaching darkness. I focused on Eliza's sorrow, her love for Thomas, and the betrayal that had bound her spirit. I called out to her, pouring all my empathy into my words. Eliza, you don't have to suffer anymore. We know the truth now. You were loved. You were always loved. This creature has lied to you. You can let go. Eliza's ghostly form appeared, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. I don't know how, she whispered, her voice trembling. Trust us, Michael said softly. Let us help you. The dark presence roared, a sound filled with fury and desperation. No! She is mine. Ignoring the voice, I held out the locket. This is your truth, Eliza. Hold on to it. Remember the love you shared with Thomas? It's stronger than any hatred." Eliza reached out, her ghostly fingers brushing against the locket. The room seemed to hold its breath as she took it into her hand. The air around her shimmered, the frost melting away. Her expression softened, and for the first time, I saw a glimmer of peace in her eyes. The dark presence shrieked, a sound of pure rage and anguish. "You cannot take her from me." Michael and I stood our ground, our voices united. "She is free now. You have no power here." With a final, ear-splitting scream, the darkness began to dissipate, the oppressive chill lifting. The shadows retreated, and the room warmed. Eliza's form grew brighter, her expression serene. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. As her spirit faded, I felt a profound sense of relief wash over me. The oppressive presence was gone, and the house seemed lighter, almost welcoming. I turned to Michael, who gave me a weary but triumphant smile. "It's over," he said, his voice tinged with exhaustion. I nodded, my heart swelling with a mixture of triumph and sorrow. "Yes, it's finally over." But as we started to leave the room, a chilling realization struck me. The frostbite on my hand hadn't faded. I stared at it, a sense of unease creeping back into my mind. And then, from the depths of the house, I heard it, a faint whisper, cold and menacing. "You may have freed her, but you are still mine." The horror wasn't over. It had just begun. Subscribe for more true scary stories. Story 2. The Whispers Within. The first time I heard the scratching, it was past midnight. I was lying in bed, struggling to sleep, when a faint, persistent noise caught my attention. It came from the wall behind my bed, a rhythmic, almost deliberate scratching. I dismissed it as the creaking of the old house, but a sense of unease settled in my chest. The next night, the scratching returned, more insistent and closer. I lay perfectly still, heart pounding, straining to catch every sound. It stopped abruptly when I shifted my weight. The silence that followed was more unsettling than the noise itself. I laughed nervously, chiding myself for being spooked by something so trivial. Days turned into weeks, and the scratching grew more frequent. It seemed to follow me from room to room. Sometimes, it was behind the kitchen cabinets, other times behind the living room walls. It was as if something was trapped inside, desperate to escape. I shared my experience with my friend Tom over coffee, hoping for a rational explanation. "Probably just rats," Tom said dismissively, sipping his coffee. "Old houses like yours are perfect for them. You should call an exterminator." I wanted to believe him, but something about the scratching felt too deliberate. It was as if whatever was making the noise was aware of my presence, reacting to my movements. One evening, driven by a mix of curiosity and frustration, I decided to knock back. The scratching stopped immediately, and my heart leaped into my throat. For a moment, there was complete silence. Then, I heard it. A faint whispering, so soft I could barely make out the words. It sounded like a woman, her voice filled with desperation and fear. "Help me," she said, the words stretching into an eerie echo. I stumbled back, feeling a chill run down my spine. That night, sleep was impossible. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the woman's voice replaying in my mind. Who was she? Why was she trapped in my walls? The questions swirled in my mind, and the more I thought about it, the more I felt a growing sense of dread. This wasn't just a rodent problem. Something far more sinister was at play. Determined to uncover the truth, I began researching the history of my house. It was built in the early 1900s and had changed hands many times. I found old newspaper articles about the previous owners, but nothing out of the ordinary. Then, I stumbled upon a story from the 1970s about a woman who had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Her name was Emily, and she was last seen near my neighborhood. There were rumors that she had been having an affair and that her lover had been a resident of my house. Could it be Emily's voice I was hearing? The idea seemed preposterous, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that the scratching and whispers were connected to her. As days passed, the whispers grew more frequent, more desperate. I began to hear them even when there was no scratching, always the same plea, "Help me." Driven by a mix of fear and curiosity, I decided to investigate further. Armed with a flashlight and a crowbar, I started prying open the walls in the places where the sounds were most frequent. My heart raced with each creak and groan of the old house, but I was determined to find out what, or who, was inside my walls. With each nail I pried loose, my anxiety grew. What was I hoping to find? Bones? A hidden room? Part of me was terrified of the answer, but I had come too far to turn back now. The first section of drywall gave way, revealing a dark void. I shone the flashlight into the space, my breath catching in my throat. It was empty. I moved to another spot where the scratching had been particularly intense, near the kitchen. As I tore away the wall, a musty smell wafted out, making me cough. I illuminated the space, expecting more darkness. Instead, I saw something glinting, a small, rusted locket. My hand trembled as I reached in and retrieved it. It was old, the clasp barely functional. Inside was a faded photograph of a young woman. Emily. That night, as I sat at the kitchen table, the locket before me, the whispers began again. This time, they were louder, more coherent. "Find me," the voice pleaded. "I'm here." I felt a shiver run through me. Emily was trying to communicate, but from where? I glanced at the open wall, the darkness within it seeming to pulse with hidden secrets. The next day, I contacted Tom again, hoping he might help me. "Tom, you have to come over," I urged. "There's something you need to see." Reluctantly, he agreed. When he arrived, I showed him the locket and the photograph. He stared at it, a frown creasing his brow. "This is weird," he admitted. "But it doesn't prove anything. Maybe someone just hid it there." "Then explain the scratching and the whispers," I challenged. Tom had no answer. We decided to dig deeper, literally. We spent hours tearing down more sections of the walls, revealing nothing but cobwebs and dust. Frustration gnawed at me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Emily was close, just beyond my reach. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard the scratching again, more frantic than ever. I bolted upright, heart pounding. The whispers followed, clearer and more insistent. "Below," they said. "Below." It dawned on me that we had been looking in the wrong place. Emily wasn't in the walls, she was beneath the house. The basement had always given me the creeps. It was damp and cluttered, filled with old furniture and forgotten junk. Tom and I descended the creaky stairs, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The air was thick with mildew and something else, something metallic. In the far corner, hidden behind stacks of boxes, was a trapdoor I had never noticed before. My heart raced as I approached it. "Tom, help me with this," I whispered. Together, we moved the boxes aside and pried open the trapdoor. A gust of cold air hit us, and I shivered despite myself. The narrow, rickety stairs led down into a pitch-black void. "Are you sure about this?" Tom asked, his voice trembling. I nodded, unable to speak. With the flashlight in one hand and a crowbar in the other, I descended into the darkness. The space below was cramped and cold. The walls were rough stone, damp with moisture. As I scanned the room with the flashlight, the beam landed on something that made my blood run cold, a set of manacles bolted to the wall, and within them, skeletal remains. Tom gasped behind me. "Oh my God," he whispered. "It's her." My mind reeled. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, echoing off the stone walls. "Help me," they cried. "Free me." I approached the skeleton, a sense of sorrow and horror washing over me. Emily had been trapped here, forgotten, her pleas for help unanswered for decades. But as I reached out to touch the manacles, the whispers changed, turning into a low, guttural growl. The growl reverberated through the small, cold chamber, making the hairs on my neck stand on end. I pulled my hand back, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it would burst from my chest. Tom and I exchanged a terrified glance, the realization dawning that we were no longer alone in this dark, forgotten place. The flashlight flickered, casting erratic shadows that seemed to dance menacingly on the stone walls. The growl grew louder, more menacing, echoing from the very walls themselves. "We need to get out of here," Tom whispered, his voice barely audible over the sinister sounds. But as we turned to leave, the trapdoor slammed shut above us with a deafening bang. I dropped the flashlight in shock, and it rolled away, casting an eerie, spinning light. We were plunged into almost complete darkness, the only illumination coming from the dim, shifting beam of the flashlight as it settled in the corner. "Tom, help me!" I shouted, my voice trembling. We rushed to the trapdoor, trying to force it open, but it wouldn't budge. Something, or someone, was holding it shut from the other side. Panic surged through me as the growling turned into a cacophony of whispers, overlapping and disjointed, surrounding us in a symphony of terror. Suddenly, I felt a cold hand grasp my ankle. I screamed, kicking out instinctively. Tom swung the crowbar, hitting the air where my attacker should have been, but there was nothing there. The whispers seemed to laugh, mocking our helplessness. "You can't leave," they taunted. "You're ours now." Desperation clawed at me as I tried to think of a way out. "Emily!" I called out, my voice breaking. "Please, help us. Tell us what to do." For a moment, the whispers paused, and I heard her voice again, faint but clear. "Release me," she whispered. "Free my soul." I realized she was talking about the manacles. With trembling hands, I moved back to the skeleton and began working on the rusty chains. Tom joined me, and together we pried them open. As the last shackle fell to the ground, a chilling wind swept through the chamber, extinguishing the flashlight's beam. The darkness was absolute, suffocating. I felt Tom's hand gripping my arm tightly, both of us too scared to move. Then, a soft, ethereal glow began to emanate from the skeleton, growing brighter and warmer until it filled the room with a gentle light. Emily's form appeared before us, a shimmering, translucent figure, her eyes filled with gratitude and sorrow. "Thank you," she said, her voice like a soft melody. "You've set me free." Her smile was bittersweet as she began to fade. But as she disappeared, the growling returned, more furious than ever. The chamber shook, dust and debris falling from the ceiling. "What the hell is happening?" Tom yelled, trying to keep his balance. The whispers turned into screams, a chaotic chorus of rage and pain. The ground beneath us trembled as if something monstrous was trying to break through. The glow that Emily left behind began to coalesce into a dark, swirling mass. It pulsated with a malevolent energy, the very air around it crackling with tension. "Run!" I shouted, yanking Tom toward the stairs. We scrambled up, the dark mass following us, its whispers now a deafening roar. Reaching the trapdoor, we pushed with all our might. It gave way, and we burst into the basement, slamming the door shut behind us. We could still hear the growling and scratching from below, but it was muffled, contained. For now. We raced upstairs and out of the house, collapsing on the front lawn, gasping for air. "What the hell was that?" Tom panted, his face pale with fear. I shook my head, unable to form coherent words. Emily was free, but something far darker had been awakened. As we sat there, trying to comprehend what had happened, I realized with a sinking feeling that this wasn't over. Whatever we had unleashed was still down there, waiting. And it wouldn't stay contained for long. In the days following our harrowing encounter, Tom and I avoided the house as much as possible. I moved in with him temporarily, unable to shake the feeling of dread that clung to me. Despite the distance, the events in the basement haunted my dreams. The whispers and growls reverberated in my mind, and I could feel the dark presence, lurking, waiting. Tom tried to distract us with normal activities, but nothing could dispel the creeping terror. One evening, as we sat silently watching TV, the screen flickered, and the power went out. "Just a blackout," Tom said, though his voice betrayed his unease. Moments later, our phones buzzed simultaneously with a text from an unknown number, "Come back. Finish it." We exchanged a look of sheer terror. "We have to go back," I said, my voice trembling. "It's not over." Emily's freed spirit awakened something far worse. "If we don't deal with it, it will find a way out." Armed with flashlights, salt, and an old book on exorcisms Tom had hastily bought online, we returned to the house. The atmosphere was thick with foreboding as we stepped inside. The air was colder, and a faint, foul smell permeated the rooms. The house groaned, as if aware of our presence. We made our way to the basement. Each step felt heavier, the whispers starting again, growing louder as we descended. The trapdoor lay in the corner, ominously silent. We opened it, peering into the darkness below. "Ready?" Tom asked, gripping my shoulder. I nodded, though my heart was pounding. As we stepped into the underground chamber, the oppressive atmosphere nearly knocked us over. The dark mass from before was there, swirling and pulsating, its whispers now a deafening cacophony. The book in Tom's hand began to tremble, almost as if alive. We sprinkled the salt in a circle around us, a protective barrier. "Start reading," I urged Tom. He opened the book, his voice shaky but determined as he began to recite the incantation. The dark mass recoiled, screeching in rage. The chamber shook violently, stones and debris raining down on us. The whispers intensified, voices of torment and anger merging into a single, malevolent entity. "You cannot banish me," it hissed, the voice echoing in the confined space. "I am eternal." Tom's voice grew stronger, more confident, as he continued the incantation. The dark mass writhed, shrinking and expanding, as if caught in a battle with the words of the exorcism. I felt a glimmer of hope, but it was short-lived. The entity lashed out, shattering the salt barrier and knocking us to the ground. Desperation clawed at me as I watched Tom struggle to his feet, the book still clutched in his hands. The dark mass moved toward him, and in a split-second decision, I grabbed the locket we had found earlier and held it up. "Emily, help us!" I cried out, my voice echoing in the chamber. A brilliant light burst from the locket, blinding and pure. Emily's form emerged from it, radiant and strong. "You must finish it," she said, her voice commanding yet compassionate. She moved towards the dark mass, her light piercing through its malevolence. With a final, guttural roar, the dark entity began to dissipate, its form unraveling in the face of Emily's light. Tom continued the incantation, his voice unwavering. The ground beneath us shook one last time before falling still. The darkness evaporated, leaving only silence and the faint glow of Emily's presence. "Thank you," she said softly, her form beginning to fade. "You have freed us both." With those final words, she vanished, leaving behind an eerie calm. Tom and I stood in the silence, trying to process what had just happened. "Is it over?" Tom asked, his voice barely a whisper. I nodded, though uncertainty gnawed at me. The house was silent, the oppressive weight lifted, but I knew that we would never truly be free from the memories. We emerged from the basement, the first light of dawn filtering through the windows. The house, once a place of terror, now felt like a hollow shell. As we stepped outside, the sun began to rise, casting long shadows on the ground. But even as we walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something watched us from the shadows, waiting for another chance to emerge. The whispers may have been silenced, but their memory would haunt us forever. The end. Subscribe for more. Thanks for watching.